The story of America's origin is often told through the lens of the Pilgrims landing at Plymouth Rock, a tale of religious freedom and hardy endurance. Yet, 13 years before the Mayflower reached Massachusetts, a different, more complex, and far more brutal chapter of American history began on the swampy banks of a Virginia river. This was Jamestown, the first permanent English settlement in North America. For generations, its story has been simplified, romanticized, and often sanitized. It has been presented as a straightforward tale of adventurous heroes, a noble Native American princess, and the dawn of a new nation. The reality, however, buried for centuries under Virginia soil, is a story of corporate ambition, environmental catastrophe, shocking violence, and foundational contradictions that continue to resonate throughout the United States today. This report uncovers the fascinating and often grim truths of Jamestown, moving beyond the legends to reveal the history that has been pieced together from modern archaeological evidence and a critical re-examination of historical records. It explores the disastrous environmental conditions that greeted the first colonists, the shocking scientific proof of survival cannibalism during the starving time, the real stories of legendary figures like Pocahontas and John Rolfe, and the pivotal year of 1619, which simultaneously planted the seeds of American democracy and American slavery. This is the story of Jamestown as it truly was, a desperate struggle for survival that laid the complicated groundwork for a nation. The founding of Jamestown was not a pilgrimage for freedom, but a corporate venture, a calculated risk taken by investors for profit and national prestige. The colony was sponsored by the Virginia Company of London, a joint stock company chartered by King James I in 1606. Its mission was multifaceted: to counterbalance the expansion of the Spanish Empire, to discover a northwest passage to Asia, to convert the native peoples to the Anglican faith, and above all, to generate wealth for its investors by exploiting the New World's natural resources such as timber, tar, and perhaps even gold. This corporate and geopolitical mindset directly shaped the colony's tragic beginnings. The selection of the settlement site on May 13, 1607, followed the company's instructions to the letter, prioritizing military strategy over human sustainability. The location on a peninsula in the James River was strategically brilliant for defense. It was far enough inland to provide warning against Spanish naval attacks and was surrounded by water on 3 sides, making it easily defensible. The river was also deep enough to allow the colonists' 3 ships, the Susan Constant, Goodspeed, and Discovery, to moor directly to the trees on the shoreline, a feature celebrated as good parking. However, this defensive stronghold was an ecological death trap. The site, which the local Paspahegh tribe used for hunting but did not inhabit, was a low-lying, marshy swamp. The river water was brackish, a tidal mix of fresh and salt water that trapped human waste and other contaminants, leading to rampant disease, including dysentery and typhoid. Compounding this disaster, the colonists arrived at the onset of what tree ring data has revealed to be the most severe 7-year drought in the region in 770 years, 1606 to 1612. This extreme drought, part of a wider climate phenomenon known as the Little Ice Age, crippled the colonists' ability to cultivate crops and severely strained the food supplies of the surrounding Powhatan chiefdom, making trade for surplus corn nearly impossible. The colony's demographic makeup created a further disadvantage. The initial 104 settlers were all men and boys, including a disproportionately high number of gentlemen who were unaccustomed to the manual labor required for survival. This critical shortage of skilled farmers and laborers meant that the colonists were ill-equipped to establish a self-sufficient food source, instead intending to trade with the Native Americans or be resupplied from England. This combination of a poor location, an unprecedented environmental crisis, and an imbalanced population set the stage for a miserable failure where most of the settlers who ventured their lives would lose them. The period known as the Starving Time represents the absolute nadir of the Jamestown experiment, a convergence of disasters that brought the colony to the brink of annihilation. The crisis was precipitated by the departure of Captain John Smith in the fall of 1609. Smith, though a divisive and belligerent figure, had imposed a rigid no-work, no-food policy and had managed, through a combination of diplomacy and force, to procure food from the Powhatan people. His return to England after a severe gunpowder injury left a critical leadership vacuum. With Smith gone and the English becoming increasingly desperate for food during the ongoing drought, the paramount chief Powhatan saw this opportunity. Relations, already tenuous, collapsed completely. Powhatan ordered his warriors to lay siege to James Fort, killing anyone who ventured outside to hunt, fish, or forage. Trapped within the fort's palisades, the colony's population, which had swelled to around 300 with the arrival of a new fleet, began to die in horrific numbers. The written accounts of survivors, particularly the colony's interim president George Percy, paint a gruesome picture of the descent into desperation. When the meager rations ran out, the colonists consumed their horses, then their dogs, cats, rats, and mice. When those were gone, they resorted to boiling their own leather shoes and belts for sustenance. The final taboo was soon crossed. As Percy wrote, the starving settlers began to dig up dead corpses out of graves and to eat them. By the spring of 1610, only 60 emaciated colonists remained alive. In May 1610, the survivors of a supply ship that had been wrecked in Bermuda finally arrived, only to find the fort in ruins and its inhabitants skeletal. The decision was made to abandon Jamestown forever. The survivors boarded their ships and sailed down the James River for less than a day. In a remarkable turn of fate, they were met by an incoming fleet carrying the new governor, Lord Delaware, along with fresh supplies and colonists. He ordered them to turn back, saving the colony from extinction at the last possible moment. The Starving Time was not a simple failure of lazy colonists. It was a cascading catastrophe, born of an environmental crisis, a political breakdown, and a military siege that nearly erased England's foothold in the New World. For centuries, the story of Jamestown was told primarily through the sparse and often biased written accounts of its survivors. The physical reality of the settlement was thought to be lost forever. However, in the late 20th century, modern science began to unearth the colony's buried secrets, challenging long-held myths and providing a visceral, tangible connection to its brutal past. The most foundational myth of Jamestown was that the original 1607 fort had long ago succumbed to the relentless erosion of the James River and was lost beneath its waters. This belief was so pervasive that a concrete seawall was constructed in 1902 to halt the very process that had supposedly claimed the historic site. Eyewitness accounts from as early as 1837 pointed to the river as the fort's final resting place, and early archaeological surveys had failed to find conclusive evidence on dry land. Archaeologist Dr. William Kelso, however, remained skeptical. He developed a counter-theory based on a key historical document, a 1610 account by Colony Secretary William Strachey, which stated that a chapel stood in the midst of the fort. Kelso reasoned that the surviving 16th century brick church tower, a prominent landmark on the island, was likely built on or near the site of this original chapel, following a once sacred ground, always sacred ground logic. In 1994, his Jamestown Rediscovery Project began excavating on this hunch, digging in the area between the church tower and the river. Within just 3 archaeological seasons, Kelso's team made a stunning breakthrough. They discovered a series of soil stains left by the decaying wooden posts of the fort's palisade walls, revealing the distinct triangular outline described in colonial records. The lost fort had been found, not in the river, but on dry land, preserved for centuries beneath a Confederate earthwork built during the American Civil War. This single discovery was revolutionary, opening the door to a complete re-examination of Jamestown's history based on physical evidence. In 2012, the Jamestown Rediscovery Team made its most shocking and poignant discovery. While excavating a 1608 cellar that had been filled with trash during the starving time, they found the butchered bones of horses, dogs, and cats, evidence of the desperate hunger of that winter. Among these remains, however, was something far more disturbing: the mutilated partial skull and a severed tibia of a 14-year-old English girl. The remains, posthumously named Jane, were sent to Dr. Douglas Owsley, a leading forensic anthropologist at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History, for analysis. His findings were chillingly precise and left no room for doubt. The skull showed evidence of 4 tentative, hesitant cuts to the forehead, as if the butcher was inexperienced or uncertain. These were followed by a powerful, decisive chop to the back of the head that split the cranium. Owsley identified clear knife marks on the jaw and cheekbone, consistent with a methodical effort to remove the tongue, facial tissue, and brain for consumption. The butchering was crude but purposeful. Owsley's conclusion was unequivocal. This was the first scientific forensic evidence of survival cannibalism at any early European colony in North America. The discovery of Jane provided irrefutable physical proof for the darkest written accounts of the starving time, which had sometimes been dismissed by later historians as sensationalist exaggeration. Isotope analysis of her bones revealed she had consumed a high-protein European diet, suggesting she was either the daughter of a gentleman or a maidservant who had only recently arrived in the colony before perishing. Jane's remains transformed the abstract horror of the starving time into a tangible, personal tragedy. The discovery of the fort and the remains of Jane are just 2 highlights of an archaeological project that has fundamentally reshaped our understanding of the colony. The Jamestown Rediscovery Team has unearthed over 4 million artifacts and mapped the layout of the original settlement. They have located the foundations of the 1608 church, where the first representative assembly in America would later meet, the primitive soldier pits that served as the first shelters, a blacksmith shop, a bakery, and several deep wells. These wells, filled with refuse after they ceased to provide fresh water, have acted as time capsules, preserving a treasure trove of artifacts, from armors and weapons to pottery, tools, and animal bones, that paint a detailed picture of daily life, industry, and diet. The project has also uncovered the graves of some of the colony's first leaders, including a burial believed to be that of Captain Bartholomew Gosnold, one of Jamestown's principal founders. The wealth of these discoveries demonstrates that history is not a static story, but a living field, constantly revised and enriched by new scientific evidence. The unvarnished truth found in the soil provides a crucial counterpoint to the official, often self-serving narratives left by the colony's leaders. The story of Jamestown is populated by figures who have become larger-than-life legends in American folklore. The most famous of these tales, the romance between Captain John Smith and Pocahontas, has been immortalized in books and films. However, historical and archaeological evidence reveals a more complex and politically charged reality, where personal relationships were intertwined with diplomacy, power, and economic survival. The woman known to the world as Pocahontas was a figure of immense historical importance, but her true story bears little resemblance to the popular myth. Her birth name was Amonateo, and she had a more private name, Montawaka, which meant flower between 2 streams. Pocahontas was merely a childhood nickname that meant playful one, or ill-behaved child. When she first encountered Captain John Smith in 1607, she was not a young woman, but a child of only 10 or 11 years old, while Smith was a 27-year-old soldier. The iconic scene of Pocahontas saving Smith from execution by throwing herself over his body is an enduring image, but but its historical accuracy is highly dubious. The story comes entirely from Smith's own account, written in his General History many years after the event occurred. Crucially, he failed to mention this dramatic rescue in his earlier letters and reports written shortly after he was released by the Powhatan. Many historians now believe that Smith either fabricated the story, exaggerated it to enhance his own legend, or, most likely, misinterpreted a complex Powhatan ceremony. This may have been a ritual symbolizing Smith's symbolic death and rebirth as a werowance, or subordinate chief, thereby formally adopting him into the Powhatan sphere of influence. According to the oral history of the Mattaponi tribe, as a child, Pocahontas would not have even been permitted to attend such a ceremony. Far from being a romantic heroine, Pocahontas was a key political figure. As a favored daughter of the powerful chief Powhatan, she served as an important emissary and translator, and her frequent visits to James Fort were a vital diplomatic link between the two cultures. The love story is a fiction, invented and embellished by 19th century writers to create a comforting nationalist myth of a good Indian who voluntarily chose English culture over her own, thereby justifying colonial expansion. Her life took a tragic turn in 1613 when she was lured onto an English ship and kidnapped by Captain Samuel Argall at Jamestown. She was held hostage for over a year in an effort to ransom her for English prisoners and stolen weapons. During her captivity, she was instructed in Christianity, baptized with the name Rebecca, and in April 1614 married the English planter John Rolfe. While John Smith's leadership was vital to the colony's initial survival, it was John Rolfe who secured its long-term future. His marriage to Pocahontas was first and foremost a matter of state. With the approval of both the Virginia governor and Chief Powhatan, the union was a diplomatic masterstroke that brought an end to the brutal First Anglo-Powhatan War, 1609 through 1614. This period of relative calm, often called the Peace of Pocahontas, gave the struggling colony the stability it desperately needed to grow. Rolfe himself, in a letter to the governor, justified the marriage not by carnal affection, but as an act for the good of this plantation and the conversion of an unbelieving creature. This peace was achieved through coercion, with Pocahontas's marriage being a condition of her release from captivity. Rolfe's second, and arguably greater contribution, was economic. The native Virginia tobacco, Nicotiana rustica, was considered too bitter and harsh for European tastes. Around 1612, Rolfe began experimenting with a sweeter, more palatable strain of tobacco, Nicotiana tabacum, whose seeds he had somehow acquired from the Spanish-controlled West Indies. This was a high-stakes gamble, as Spain considered the sale of these seeds to foreigners a crime punishable by death. The gamble paid off spectacularly. This new strain of tobacco thrived in the Virginia soil and quickly became the brown gold that the Virginia Company had been searching for. It was the profitable cash crop that finally gave the colony a stable economic foundation. By 1617, Jamestown was exporting 20,000 pounds of tobacco to England. The next year, that amount doubled. This economic boom, made possible by the peace secured through his political marriage, transformed Jamestown from a precarious outpost into a profitable venture and created the immense demand for labor that would soon be filled by indentured servants and enslaved Africans. The year 1619 stands as one of the most consequential years in American history. Within the span of a few months, 3 pivotal events occurred at Jamestown that would establish the foundational and often contradictory pillars of American society. It was the year that saw the birth of representative government, the arrival of the first enslaved Africans, and the implementation of a plan to build a society based on families. Following the Virginia Company's issuance of the Great Charter in 1618, which abolished the colony's harsh military-style law, Governor Sir George Yeardley was instructed to summon a legislative assembly. On July 30, 1619, the first representative governing body in the Americas convened in the choir of the Jamestown Church. This General Assembly was composed of the governor, his royally appointed council, and 22 locally elected representatives, or burgesses, with 2 coming from each of the colony's 11 settlements. This assembly, which would evolve into the House of Burgesses, was a landmark moment. It established the principle of self-government in the English colonies, a right the colonists believed they held as Englishmen under the tradition of the Magna Carta. For 6 days, the burgesses debated and passed laws on a range of issues, from prohibitions against idleness and drunkenness to the mandatory observance of the Sabbath. Tellingly, their very first order of business was to set a minimum price for the sale of tobacco, demonstrating the inseparable link between governance and the colony's economic engine. This institution would become the political training ground for future American revolutionaries, including George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Patrick Henry. Just a month after the first assembly met, in late August 1619, a different kind of arrival marked a darker beginning. An English privateer ship named the White Lion sailed to Point Comfort near Jamestown, and as John Rolfe documented, sold 20 and odd Negroes to the colonists in exchange for victuals, food supplies. These individuals were not simply Africans. They were Kimbundu-speaking people from the Kingdom of Ndongo in West Central Africa, modern-day Angola. They had been captured in a war by the Portuguese and forced onto a slave ship, the San Juan Bautista, which was bound for Veracruz, Mexico.
In the Gulf of Mexico, the Portuguese vessel was attacked and robbed of a portion of its human cargo by the White Lion and another English privateer, the Treasurer. Their sale at Point Comfort marked the beginning of institutional, race-based slavery in English North America. While their exact legal status at the moment of arrival has been debated by historians, whether they were treated as indentured servants or enslaved for life, the evidence strongly suggests they were considered property from the outset. They were bought and sold into bondage in a colony that, driven by the labor demands of its tobacco economy, would codify chattel slavery into law within a few decades. This event established the brutal paradox at the heart of the American experiment, a new society championing representative government for some, while simultaneously building its prosperity on the forced labor of others. The third pivotal event of 1619 was a deliberate act of social engineering designed to ensure the colony's permanence. The Virginia Company recognized that a settlement composed almost entirely of men was inherently unstable, as men were more likely to abandon the colony. To fix the people on the soil, the company initiated a program to recruit and transport women to Virginia to become wives for the colonists. In 1619, a shipment of approximately 90 single women arrived in Jamestown. The company offered them attractive incentives, including free passage, a plot of land, and a dowry of clothing and furnishings. Crucially, they were given the right to choose their own husbands from among the eager suitors, making them, in effect, America's first mail-order brides. This organized effort to establish families was a clear recognition that the long-term success of the colony depended not just on governance and economics, but on creating a stable, rooted society. Together, these three events of 1619 forged the contradictory template for the nation that would follow, a society founded on ideals of liberty, the reality of bondage, and the structure of the family. Jamestown was not the simple, heroic beginning often portrayed in national mythology. It was a brutal, commercially driven enterprise that teetered on the edge of annihilation for years. Its survival was owed less to romantic ideals and more to a last-minute maritime rescue, a politically strategic marriage, and the cultivation of an addictive, labor-intensive cash crop. The story of its early years is one of profound suffering, marked by disease, an unprecedented drought, and a desperation so extreme that it led to survival cannibalism. Thanks to the meticulous work of the Jamestown Rediscovery Project, we can now see past the legends that obscured this harsh reality for centuries. Modern archaeology and forensic science have given us irrefutable proof that the fort was not lost to the river, that the starving time was as horrific as the darkest accounts claimed, and that the celebrated story of Pocahontas was one of childhood political maneuvering, not adult romance. Ultimately, Jamestown's legacy is a microcosm of the American experience itself. It is the site of a profound collision between European, Native American, and African cultures, a collision that shaped the continent's destiny. It is simultaneously the birthplace of American representative democracy and the entry point for the systematic enslavement of Africans in English North America. Its story is one of incredible human perseverance against nearly impossible odds, but it is also a story of violence, coercion, and exploitation. To understand the buried truths of Jamestown is to understand the deep and often contradictory roots of the nation that grew from its muddy, blood-soaked soil.